Thank you. I'm here today to face my critics and answer all questions. In my defense, let me say that the transformation of this fine old neighborhood is long overdue. In its best interests, I am speeding up the development timeline with a marvelous comeback that is taking place right here.
Did it ever occur to you to empower the people who are already here? I've heard everything you have to say. It's time for me to be heard.
And who are you?
Who am I? I've lived here for 40 years is who I am. I went to school here, lost my parents here, married my wife here, raised my children here, and I deserve to spend my last years in peace and security here. I'm the true picture of who should populate this neighborhood.
Oh, so you think you'll fit in? Are you a bohemian type? Are you cool, edgy, hip?
I didn't have to be until you showed up and just started throwing shade everywhere.
Well, if you aren't poised to receive the benefits from the area's new market-tested profile, why do you want to be here?
I want to be here because I've always been here. I just told you, I was here when you got here, and I did fine without you. Why did you come?
I was attracted by the character of the area, the gritty authenticity.
But you're planning on changing everything.
I am looking at the long-term horizon. I am proposing an upgrade.
Like what?
Like conversion of some of the eyesores.
Like what?
Vacant lots to common spaces.
We had a park till the city cut the upkeep fund.
Bars.
We had bars, flying, the drone, the bluebird.
Shops.
Independent mom and pops.
Bakery.
2 of them. And a drugstore. Colored almonds.
A bank.
Bank of the Commonwealth. But it closed. Because common people stopped having wealth. You couldn't get a loan or a mortgage. You know, redlining. But at the beginning of the year, they were good for calendars and all the ink pens you can have. You giving away calendars?
Trendy foods.
Stanley Mania Cafe, Parks Barbecue, the Esquire Deli.
Boutiques.
The Goodwill.
Daycare facilities.
The kids would go to Mama Johnson's for lunch every day. And after school, they'd go there till their parents got off. And the neighborhood girl would babysit to make money while in high school.
Galleries.
You might got me with that one. But they did hang pictures in the community center. Then the city cut the funds for that. See, we had everything that you're talking about bringing back. Till we got urban renewal, white flighted, and financial crisis hit. Then property values fell like a lead ball, leaving us with abandoned buildings, vacant lots that lay fallow and forgotten, except by those who stayed because they couldn't or wouldn't move. Now here you come, throwing around money like Johnny threw around apple seeds.
I prefer to think of it as exercising my monetary prerogatives.
And long timers, owners, renters, outdoors.
Many have been able to cash out and retire.
Because you've been tempting my neighbors to sell, driving up the property values, raising the rents. What about the senior citizens on a fixed income?
Well, there may have been some regretful lack of sensitivity in a limited number of cases, but to err is human, and to develop is divine.
Many of us are on a fixed income. We have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to stay afloat. If my rent goes up any more, I won't be able to afford the necessities. Food, water, heat.
Any spike in rental rates is just a result of normal demand in the housing market. An influx of capital is like a shot in the arm to the...
Like hell. More like a shot of lethal heroin or a fatal shot through the heart.
To address the issue of affordable housing and homelessness, I plan to, over a period, hire people who live in the area to reduce the impact on the region.
And the impact reducing jobs, how much will they pay?
Commiserate with the skill level. We have plans to offer priority to local residents for new affordable housing.
Affordable housing, like in the 50s and 60s?
But upscale. I am going to make this neighborhood great. Again.
When?
As soon as all the resistance to my vision abates.
How?
Complete restoration.
What?
Tear it all down and build it back up again. That is the only way to retain the unique character that is worth saving about it all.
When do you plan on doing all this?
Well, I can't give an exact date, but I promise you we will have an army of spades in the ground sooner than you can think.
An army of spades in the ground sooner than I think. Mm-hmm. And you really mean that, don't you?
Each and every word, sir. Each and every word. Next question, please.
thing called gentrification was not just a word, it evokes something, right? And so we want to get that reaction from you. But what I want to do at this time is introduce you to our panelists. They've been doing some dynamic things in our community around this issue for over 30 years. So I'd like to just introduce you to the panelists. Ted Phillips, who is the founder and executive director of the Miami Housing Coalition. For those who are not familiar with them, their services help families retain their homes permanently, preserve family assets, and protect know the North End. The North End is a historic Detroit neighborhood. The traditional boundaries of the North End are the Fort Freeway, Russell Street, Highland Park, to the founded in 1994 by Bishop Edward Van, a Second Heavenly Church, Vanguard's mission in the historic community is to cultivate a vibrant and healthy community where people live, work, and play. Their stated core values are economic equity and racial justice. They look to accomplish these goals through housing development, commercial and economic development, community engagement, and community improvement and beautification. Representing Vanguard today is Ms. Monica Evans. Thank you. This next individual is no stranger to any of us. Commissioner Earl Clark Coleman is a dedicated public servant who is currently serving for a fifth term on the Wayne County Commission. She chairs the Committee on Public Safety, Judiciary and Homeland Security, and the Committee on Audit and Government Operations. She also serves on the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Complex, as well as the Local Parks Memorial Task Force. Prior to being a commissioner, she served 8 years in the Michigan Senate's 3rd District and served 2 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives for the 11th District, where she was instrumental in impacting policy regarding education, as well as easing the requirements for grandparents who seek to adopt children. Now, issues impacted in that space. She actually sponsored those bills. Amen. Thank you. I'm going to open up the conversation. We throw this word around a lot. And we act, some of us react to it because we know what it means, we go to certain things. Some of us really don't know what it means, right? So we're going to open up with the panelists. What is gentrification, right? So that's what we were talking about. And that's what the exhibit was about today, right? Gentrification. Let's start off with...
Thank you, and it is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. I believe it's displacing communities, all in the name of improvement. And I know that we all want improvement. We all want our neighborhoods improved. However, we don't want to displace the people that's been there over the years through bad times and good times. And unfortunately, that's what happens in many cases.
Phillips, you want to take that?
I would second that, and I would say that it's a problem we've had a long time. I can remember going back to when I was in the Detroit Housing Commission for a few years. I didn't find out UCHC. Thank you. I've been there a long time, 36 years, but it was going a little bit before me, and I haven't ran it into the ground yet. But I took a couple years off to be in the Archer administration in public housing during the Clinton-Gingrich disaster nationally in public housing. And, you know, one of the issues there was displacement of public housing residents. We once had 10,000 public housing units in the city of Detroit. We've got about 4 now. And during that era, one of the issues was that the only money available to do renovations was called Hope 6 money. And residents knew that that meant displacement for them. And they actually fought against bringing money into their communities because of what it would do. And what it did, we lost 6,000 units of public housing in Detroit, and nationally hundreds of thousands. So I would echo exactly what the commissioner said there in terms of what gentrification is.
Good evening. My name is Monica Edmonds, and I currently work with Vanguard Community Development Corporation. It's interesting to hear that you worked with the Housing Commission for the Archer administration, because probably after you left, I started there. And I was responsible for managing the Hope 6 development. Woodbridge Estates and Garden View Estates were my projects. There were millions of dollars being held up because the Housing Commission was in was in troubled status, and they couldn't spend the money. There was a lot going on at that time. However, we were able to shake funding loose, start infrastructure improvements, and eventually complete the development of Woodbridge Estates, which is mixed income housing. It is affordable and market rate. It is rental and home ownership, and it has sparked investment in the surrounding communities. It has provided housing for working families in Detroit, but there is the part about displacement or relocation. As we learned, the proper term, relocation, they were provided assistance and funding to move off-site and promises to return to the site if they chose. Vouchers were issued for families who wanted to move outside of the city limits or use their vouchers. There were portable vouchers. And some elected to stay in their scattered site, single-family homes, and some, after 10, 12 years of relocation, were happy about returning. I think gentrification, the definition, is about investment in areas that have seen decline. You hear a lot about coffee shops, bike lanes, entertainment districts, things like that. And I think that redeveloping neighborhoods that are traditionally African American or minority owned, I think it has a negative connotation when families are not involved in the planning process. When families are moved out or forced out, I should say, without having an opportunity to invest or be a part of the economic uplifting of that community.
So it was, actually I can go off script because there's a lot to unpack in just that opening. There was this distinction apparently made between relocation and displacement, right? Or at least implied distinction. If the panel can talk to me a little bit about what's the difference between the two, and when does it become relocation versus displacement, right?
I think an example would be of relocation is when a company would come in and they want to build this new plant, let's say, and we could think of one which was GM, in which they came in and they took property because they needed this property. So what they did, they paid you for your property, and then also paid you for moving expenses. Now, many people welcomed that because the area had declined a lot. So many people welcomed the chance to sell their homes and move somewhere which was the home of their choice, the place of their choice to move. So that would be relocation. Gentrification is when when they come in, and a lot of that is going on downtown on Jefferson, in that area. When they come in and they improve the building, a lot of improvement, and then they hike the rent so high until the people that are there cannot afford to stay there because they can't afford. They love the improvements, and they have a lot of lofts and down that a lot of the warehouses or homes over there, they created these nice lofts, and they're gorgeous. had the same thing happening over in Cork County. But the people that are living there can't really afford to buy those. And she mentioned when I was a state senator, I don't know how many of you know where Herman Gardens is located. Okay, so when they decided to tear down Herman Gardens, and the community, the people who were living there, of course it needed to be restored, but they decided to tear it down, and they promised the people that they would be able to come back, because they had meetings and they had their own little community organization, and they were promised they can come back. Do you know how long it took for them to replace Herman Gardens? I mean, it's gorgeous now, and they got a lot of nice little homes, but by that time, 10 years, maybe more than that, 14 years? Where are the persons going? They're not waiting for 14 years to be able to come back there. So chances are, none of those people probably had a chance to move back into those homes, even though they were promised they would be able to. So that's the problem with it. I'm thoroughly in support of economic development or improvement, but not at the expense of people's lives.
To bring it full circle on Herman Gardens, that was the last grant that I was General Manager of Program Planning and Budget, and we wrote the grant that got the Hope 6 money for Herman Gardens, and I quit when they decided they weren't going to do the program that we wrote the grant for. So just to bring that full circle. But I also want to cover two quick stories as how displacement can be really ugly, and what 1214 Griswold, a building with 120 plus seniors, mostly seniors and few disabled, on Section 8. Was bought by a private developer to change it to $1,400, $1,500, $2,000 a month rents. Everybody was displaced. Yeah, they got Section 8 vouchers, they got relocated, we did that. We made sure everyone, and that's rare, very often people fall through the cracks. But at the end of the day, which took about a year because of the regulations and what have you, which I won't bore you with, but at the end of the day, a community was completely displaced. People that had lived together for years, people that had walked down to the CVS downtown and got the drugs and the prescriptions for their neighbor, that had looked out for one another, was completely displaced. And we humanely, and I say we, the Housing Coalition, we were very involved in that one. We tried to relocate neighbors together and look at things like that. But you can't do that. And what was missing there was, yes, people got benefits. We fought for that. There was tax credits given, and the developer agreed to pay for relocation costs and all sorts of things that don't normally happen. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, a community was completely displaced. On the other hand, 40 Davenport was a much smaller building. It wasn't for a low-income population, but still it was a good example of what can happen. And what happened there instead is that the building was completely refurbished. There was negotiations between the city and the developer, and at the end of the day, everyone there was relocated temporarily and offered the opportunity to come back at the same rent. I think the escalations was 1% a year. One of the residents is here right now, he's nodding yes. 1% a year for a lifetime. So they will be able to live in a newly refurbished building. It's a much smaller building than 1214 Griswold, but that one worked well. So it can work, but it isn't totally. Part of it is a matter of making sure that people are done right by getting at least the help to relocate, and they're not made homeless or forced into substandard housing. But there's more than just that. Communities are still destroyed.
Well, sure, I'll add. From my experience, the relocation occurred with government-funded housing as opposed to privately owned housing, and it was a requirement. We couldn't move forward with any form of relocation until HUD approved the plan, and they ensured, we had to ensure that the residents would be properly relocated. They signed off, and then they were opted or given an option to move back. Displacement, as Commissioner Clark stated, is actually when you are no longer able to afford the taxes and or rents associated with improvements made to the area.
So what's the driver, of gentrification? What is it market driven? Is it, government picking and choosing neighborhoods? Like, what's the driver? And let me just say too, if you see me inching closer, that means wrap up the comments because we want to get to more, please. Thank you.
I think, of course, that we went through a bad period in '07, and Detroit literally was destroyed with all the vacant homes and boarded up homes and all of that. So I think that right now, and I'm speaking primarily of neighborhoods. I'm not speaking of downtown, because my district, my commission district, represents mostly neighborhoods. And I'm just going to talk about, very, very quickly, I'm going to talk about the Russell Woods Community Association. That is in my district. And it's an older neighborhood, but it used to be a lovely neighborhood. And it is coming back. And I'm happy to hear that. But the city does identify maybe about 7 or 8 different areas to work in, and that's one of the ones that they're working in. But what we discovered there was that many of the people who had been losing their homes because they couldn't afford the taxes, they weren't aware that there were programs that they could apply for that would allow them to save those homes. They didn't know. These are mostly older folks who have been there. So what we did was the community got together and they got a grant, and they went door to door and they talked to all of the residents there, and they let them know that if you can't pay those taxes, don't lose your home. There are programs that you can apply for through the county and to save those homes. So the driving force is economic development and restoration.
Let's just pass it.
Okay. I work in a neighborhood called the North End, and Candia spoke of the boundaries. It is an area that we considered years ago to be the core of the city. It's not downtown. It's not, on the North End. It's right at the Boulevard in Woodward. And I sat at a table back in '08 with a lot of funders, philanthropy, private foundations. I see my former colleague out there, and we all work for an organization that targeted either redevelopment, rehabilitation, or I think there were 3 R's. I can't remember them all at this time. But the North End was an area that was targeted for redevelopment because of the thousands of parcels of vacant land. And I started that organization back in 2008. And at that time, we couldn't convince homeowners to purchase the adjacent lots. There was an adjacent lot program that probably still exists. And I'm speaking from the past because I just relocated back to Michigan last year. So I'm just getting refamiliarized with everything. But it just so happened I came back and got an opportunity to work back in the North End. And back in 2008 through 2010, those lots were about $50. Right now in the North End, those lots are about $20,000. And so when we speak about gentrification, we had an opportunity in 2008. I had an opportunity. We all had an opportunity to invest thousands of vacant lots. And we, identified them. And, at that time, we were just trying to maintain them. The city couldn't keep up. Properties were lost, demoed, and we were planting seeds, trying to grow sunflowers, and trying to think of what what could we do with this land to keep it from being an eyesore? And when I returned back and took a tour of the area and, started looking at available properties, I couldn't believe, the value just, it's just unaffordable at this point. And, I can't say that it's city-driven, but I do know what is a factor is the rents downtown have increased so much that it's really, you're going to see the pattern shift from downtown to midtown to north end, and then what's next? Highland Park, right? So, I don't work for the city. I'm not part of the administration. I just know what I see and the pattern that I've seen over, the past 10, 12 years. And, there was an opportunity to be a part of the neighborhood revival, if you will.
I don't know, where I sit, it seems like the driving force is profits and whatever can be gotten by folks with money to get. Harping a little bit on the tax foreclosure issues, we dealt with them since 2003. Yeah, certainly there were times that people could have gotten a home for $500 and almost like the lots, people didn't take advantage of it. The city didn't take advantage of it, and the county and everyone else, and that was a missed opportunity. But certainly we saw times, even during those times, investors would buy properties for $500 and want to get $800 a month rent, even then. So it's all about profit and what can be had, and what illusion we can have of amenities in neighborhoods that justify ridiculous rents.
Are there any, you've seen the production, you've also heard from our panelists. Are there any reactions, comments, question?
Buying an extra property like that's next door, it's not simple. I'm still going through the process of trying to get the lot next door to me. And it's been, 3 years now? And they say, oh, you have it. So what do I do now? Where do I take the money? Who do I talk to? You're not helping. No one wants to help you. Depends on who you are, really.
Reaction?
Thank you all for this beautiful exhibit performance. It was amazing. My question is, you've all acknowledged that gentrification is a violent act, whether that be silent or not. How can communities protect themselves against gentrification?
Strong neighborhood associations. Let me tell you that's the voice. They said that the squeaky wheel gets the voice, gets the grease, the oil. Well, if you've got a strong neighborhood association and they're speaking in many, many voices, so your one voice might not do it, but the neighborhood association is strong, and that's what happened at Russell Woods neighborhood association. That's what works. And the lady that mentioned the lots, Detroit still has, if your home is adjacent to the lot next door, you can buy that lot for $100.
But I haven't been able to pay them because there's no paperwork. There's no way to follow up.
Okay, so I did buy a lot that was next door to some property that I owned, and all I did was went down to the, what was it? No, it was it was probably the land bank, but it was out on Myers and, what's that? Northwest Activity Center. They were out there at Northwest. All you do is, if the lot is next door to you, you walk in there, you pay them $100, and you get it. I don't know why.
They want us to prove that you've been taking care of the lot, and you've been taking care of
There does seem to be a criteria that's developed on the fly, but supposedly the land bank is handling those, Detroit Land Bank is handling those, and they brag about the numbers that the outlandish numbers that they have sold. So I don't know, maybe your local community person from the mayor's office or something could troubleshoot that. One thing I would say, there's a number of groups working on land trust issues. I'm not an expert on land trust issues, but if you want to know what a community can do, that's certainly one thing. A more practical, from my perspective, thing that I am really aware of, though, is the tax foreclosures. Again, we've got 53,000 properties in Wayne County that are on a tax foreclosure petition in June of this year. For next year's foreclosure is March 31st. That's up 5,000 from a year ago. There's not a community in the city that you can't throw a rock and find a place that's still in tax foreclosure. If you know somebody like that, I mean, we've been doing this work since 2003. We serve 4,000 to 5,000 households a year. We've gotten arrangements with the city where people can actually buy their house and not have it go to auction, the preference given to the occupant. We've bought 1,157 homes in the last 3 years in that fashion. That's a small drop in the bucket, but it's a start. So if you know somebody in your community that is in that kind of a situation, certainly at least that house can be saved. So I would urge you to get them to us. And if you want to see me afterwards, I can give you how to get a hold of us.
And we will, actually each panelist is a resource. And so we will have, at the conclusion of our discussion today, have them give their contact information out.
The plays were absolutely amazing. The music was amazing. The poem was out of this world. Lift Every Voice was a beautiful, beautiful and stirring day. The first scene was the most troublesome to me, and that's where I want us to land with the questioning. So there's people buying, there's people selling, and they're not aware of the big beast behind it. And that's who I care about, the people that are not taking loving ownership of the villages that they move into. So I just got to say, I have a house that's 100 years old, and I did some research on this house, and it's a Ford home, right? So we know who he hated. And I did some research, and the craziest thing is, originally, once upon a time, somebody with the same last name as me lost the house. Crazy story. Because, you know, Catholics and Jews and Dearborn, you know.
But you know, there is, you know, how much, when it comes to what's going on in our communities and our neighborhoods, the elephant in the room, right? What role is race playing in this issue, right?
Well, of course, it is race, but going along with this, poverty. It is race, but it's also poverty. If you are black or Latino, and you, or one of the other people of color, and you have a lot of money, then it doesn't play a part in it at all. But if you are a person of color and you are poverty stricken, you don't really have the funds, that's who gets affected by it most. And I just would like to say that to me, the speculators are the biggest problem in our city. People that purchase homes, people that live in other countries are buying the property. And that's okay if they buy it and they fix it up. I don't mind if they buy property, they fix it up, they sell it, then that puts the property back on the tax roll, and it also fixes up the neighborhood. But we've got speculators that at the auction, and the first auction is in October, and that one you pay the back taxes. This is the Wayne County treasurer. And the second auction, but if those properties don't sell, then they go to the second auction, and you can pick those up for $500. Well, that's what the speculators are doing. They're picking up those properties, and they're not taking care of them. They're just picking them up, and they're sitting on the properties, waiting for the city to improve. And I think that's the biggest problem that's going on in Detroit.
So 15 years ago, we used to be able to say, well, we have a 92% African American city. Now we're saying we have an 85% African American city. If we can continue the conversation about your thoughts as it relates to race and gentrification.
Traditionally, you only hear about gentrification happening in African American communities, or communities that are primarily occupied by minorities. You don't hear about gentrification in rural America, right? Or in suburbs, or in areas that are predominantly white or Caucasian, right? And so for the North End, that community was, I'd say, 98% African American, and has been, traditionally, it's historically an area that has a lot of history, a lot of music history, a lot of history around good restaurants, barbecue, and jazz, and now techno and house, and so I think that it is important to keep the historical significance of a community. You can't let or allow private investors to come in and not recognize the communities that have stayed through the duration of the years of disinvestment. And I think that is done by connecting or having a strong community organization. And if you don't have one, you need to get involved with a block club or some type of community association, in the surrounding area, and make your voices heard.
And just to add a little bit to what Commissioner Clark said, the results of tax foreclosure and those $500 buys in October is that we've gone from a city that was once, a little bit before my time, 80% owner-occupied, a city that, to now being a city of less than half of the properties that are owner-occupied. And what we've seen with the $500 buys is people still rent them, but these investors are buying for $500 and renting for $800. So, they don't need to make very long to make back what they had paid for it, and they're not putting anything into them. That's just, that's the bottom line. But this is not an investment. This is just, this is not a long-term investment. This is just a quick rip-off of the city.
There's something I forgot to mention. My district, I have the highest economic development in, my district covers Palmer Park, University District, Sherwood Forest, the high end. It also goes back to where, Linwood and areas of that, Elmhurst and things like that. So my district is very diversified. You don't have that going, you don't have the gentrification going on in the higher end of my district. You only have it going on in the lower end. But I gotta say that there's a lot of movement from the suburbs, people in the suburbs moving back into. Every house that gets empty is sold, especially in those high-end areas.
I don't know if this court will reach.
You asked for a definition for gentrification, and I think we've already said it. It's investment, and it's based on a business model. And when you talk about Hope 6 funds, that was a business model. So Ted Phillips, I know Ted from the Housing Commission, Monica also from the Housing Commission. So when you talk about relocation, and it's based on a business model, and if you go back to the 80s when Reagan deemed this trickle-down economics, that was the beginning to allow those tax cuts for businesses to invest. And it left us out of that equation. So when you say it was 12, 14 years before Garden View Estates came on board based on Herman Gardens, you know, that all that was part of that whole process in time to allow that business model, that investment to take effect in that particular neighborhood. So when you offer residents vouchers and you don't have housing for them in the cities, of course they're going to take vouchers to the suburbs. So you have a populace of our people living in the suburbs without the financing to move back to invest. So everything is tied to this investment model that allows corporations and businesses to reap the wealth, land, and benefit from that. So when you talk about some solution, I believe the solution lies in a change in our consciousness as a people. I heard somebody said, it may have been Ted Phillips, about your organization, that in terms of the blight itself, housing, vacant houses don't create blight. Our consciousness as a people create the blight. How we perceive our neighborhoods, how we perceive our communities, how we perceive our households. That eliminates blight. So to change this whole mindset, and I don't think we should attach ourselves to this gentrification as if we're being victimized. I believe that we have to change our consciousness and see ourselves as developers of our communities, of our households, of our families, of our churches. It's on us. So the government is always going to come from a business model. We have a Republican administration now. So that's what's driving this.
We should put you on the panel next time, huh? You know what? There was something that was mentioned, and I'll come back.
I spent 35 years, retired 2 years ago from Detroit public housing.
So she knows, right? So, but, you know, Hanifa brings up something. She mentioned tax breaks. And in a lot of these communities, these new developments and new developers are getting tax breaks. And the property values are going up, and the people who are being impacted by that increase in property value are the vested citizens. Those who have been there, who have owned the homes, are now seeing their taxes go up. However, the new folks coming in have gotten tax breaks. Talk, if you would, about policy that would offset that. You know, I know you deal, say probably more case management type of work, but I'm certain you have some ideas about policies on how to remedy that so that the vested citizens can also, as was stated earlier, participate in the growth without being pushed out. Let's start with the policy maker, and then we'll go to...
Well, you know, there are those companies that do get tax breaks, and should be required of any company that receives a tax break, they should be required to set aside a certain percentage of the, if it's an apartment building, then they should be required to set aside a percentage of those apartments for low income, for people, so that people can afford to stay in those places rather than being pushed out. And I know that, and if they're receiving those tax breaks, they should be able to afford to do just that. And we have that happening in so many cases where, and I think that in some of these, there are percentages. I think that that they have to set aside maybe 20 or 30% for low income. But then I don't know how long that lasts. You know, you might set aside that and then live there for a couple of years, and then they increase it anyhow. So it is, in order to qualify for those, there should be a commitment that people who are living there should be able to afford to stay there.
Well, Detroit did pass such an ordinance. I think Mary Sheffield was the sponsor of it. President Pro Tem Sheffield was. The problem with it, though, is that it defines affordable as 80% of the area median income. And you take the area, not Detroit, but the Tri-County area, essentially, and you have 80% of the area median income as a person with $40,000. Now, I see folks that get SSI at $771. I see seniors that get $1,200, $1,400 a month. You know, when you're looking at what's affordable to somebody at 80% of the area median income, you're talking about $750, $800 a month rent. So that's not affordable. The other kind of tax break is what replaced a lot of the public housing that was lost. The housing that's been built in the last 10, 15, 20 years or so has been low-income housing tax credit housing, and the problem there as well is that it's not like public housing in Section 8 where the rents are set at 30% of the person's income. They're flat rents based upon 50 or 60% AMI, people at that level. So it does help some, but again, you still have situations where low-income